Okay, so we found that structures and processes promoting collaboration are in place in Finland. For example, the Valtteri network, which focuses on collaboration between resource centers and schools for supporting individual learners and for teacher professional learning. Then there are the teacher education forums, which supports TPL through collaboration. Another strength in Finland is the strong partnership between universities and teacher training schools, which provide student teachers with practical experience and mentorship. And furthermore, collaboration between teachers at school level is encouraged, but there are challenges in achieving it, especially when we talk about co-teaching that benefits all learners. Also, collaboration among all stakeholders involved in supporting children, like teachers, specialists, and multi-professional teams, is also a challenge. In summary, the Finnish education system considers collaboration and communication across various system and stakeholder levels. However, at school level, stakeholders are concerned about the lack of a strong operational culture of inclusive education, and this seems to negatively impact collaboration among professionals. Then to give you some of the recommendations we found that it is important to establish clear guidelines for collaboration among all stakeholders involved in learner support. It is important to improve the communication channels to enhance information sharing among stakeholders involved in learner support. We need to ensure that initial teacher education and induction programs address issues of collaboration and communication for inclusive education and equip future skills with the necessary skills and practical strategies, for example, the co-teaching that we have mentioned already. Also, we need to provide continuous professional development and resources to multi-professional groups and encourage collaborative practices, such as co-teaching among teachers, and develop a national CPD framework that ensures whole school approaches to inclusion. I know that was very quick and I'm sorry, but I move on to the Irish findings we have so far. And you can see that also in Ireland, we found that structured cooperation between key education bodies, including, for example, the NCSE, ICE, higher education institutions, and the Teaching Council is in place. The Towards Inclusion program for interschool collaboration enables schools to share local expertise and engage in lesson observations. However, the need for early detection of learner difficulties through counseling services and school-based welfare system remains. So additionally, the need for pathways to appropriate support, such as therapeutic intervention, still requires attention. Also, actively involving parents in the design and implementation of school-level support systems requires more effort. And we have heard about this already from Kathleen in the keynote when she spoke about parents be more than receivers of information and become more contributors. So the evidence in Ireland highlights a strong commitment at the policy level to building partnerships and promoting coordination, while also pointing to aspects that require further development in cross-sector collaboration and school-level implementation. Despite this advancement, stakeholder consultations reveal certain issues in ensuring effective collaboration in practice. And one key issue raised is the lack of coordination between the health and education systems. And we have seen that already in one of our participants' questions that Antula was addressing before. So the recommendations for Ireland we have found is that it's important to strengthen the coordination between education, health, and social services by formalizing interagency partnerships, to improve communication among school staff and multi-professional teams by clarifying responsibilities and common goals, then to formalize school-level partnerships with external agencies by introducing clear protocols on communication, shared roles and responsibilities, and accountability. And last but not least, to support early detection and school-based welfare systems by integrating counseling and therapeutic services into schools and ensuring structured pathways to specialist support with active parent involvement. And I'm very happy to first welcome Jukka Ventoniemi, He is a senior advisor at the Finnish National Agency for Education, and his expertise and research focus lies on inclusion, social participation, school leadership, and the development of inclusive learning environments. The question is how to develop teacher cooperation in schools and cooperation between special educators and teachers, and also to touch upon what actually Paolo Pedroso was focusing on, the inclusive leadership, how to lead these developments, and then to finalize the contribution about social participation of learners and how to include all students. So Jukka, the floor is yours, and welcome again.
Thank you, Margarita, and thank you for today's earlier presentation and ideas you shared with us. And I would like to continue from that and highlight a few aspects about developing inclusion with an emphasis of the Finnish context and mainly in a school level. An inclusive school supports both learning and well-being, and when students receive enough support for their learning and schooling within their familiar group of students and everyday learning, their social participation is strengthened and their overall school experience becomes more positive. And at the same time, the atmosphere at the entire school community improves with further fostering the development of the safe and well-being learning environment. So inclusion is not only a matter of structures or resources, it should be very core mission of the school, how we see our students as a human beings and how we understand the role of the school as an institution. Building an inclusive school is above all a question of values and attitudes, and it requires consistent effort at all levels of education. The success of inclusive education depends on the commitment and systematic development of the whole school community. The key factors include inclusive leadership, collaboration, teacher education, and enough resources, as well as ensuring that learners themselves have real opportunities to participate. So I would like to highlight 3 key factors to consider when developing an inclusive school culture, and what we are now promoting in our Renewable Basic Education Act and National Core Curriculum in Finland. And first of them is teacher collaboration. Inclusion is too often viewed as a part of the special education. We need a broader and deeper understanding of what inclusion truly means. Inclusion concerns all students and all teachers in schools. And through co-teaching, teachers can share responsibilities, plan teaching more diversely, and support each other's well-being at the work. At the same time, it enables differentiation and the consideration of students' individual needs more effective than wouldn't be possible for the working alone. Especially collaboration between special education teachers and other teachers supports an inclusive school culture and reduces the stigma effects on special education of students of special education needs. At its best, cooperation between special education and teachers helps to build shared understanding of what support means in the school context. And joint everyday work makes it possible to address both the individual needs of students and the learning of the whole class. In this way, co-teaching is not only a pedagogical tool, but also a cultural practice that strengthens the inclusive thinking and structures of the entire school community. As earlier Paul showed, we need time for collaboration planning, and that is one of the crucial structure we have to work on in schools. The second key point is inclusive leadership, what Paolo also highlights in his presentation. Inclusion is not a single action. It should be seen as a continuous and long-term development process in which the school structures, practices, and systems are evaluated and adapted to meet the needs of all students. Developing the school culture is an essential part of putting the inclusion in action. It does not happen automatically. It requires conscious, collective, and value-based work from the entire school community. And above all, this requires the inclusive leadership. And the heart of developing an inclusive culture are leaders who act according to inclusive values and serve as the key agents of the change. Those leaders initiate and guide the direction of the change, but they cannot transform the school culture alone. The successful cultural change requires leaders who can engage the entire staff, clearly articulate the needs of the change, and communicate a shared vision for the desired inclusive future. So the school leaders could be seen as a culture brokers, as Katrina earlier mentioned. And the third key point is the student participation. And at the end, inclusion takes place in the classrooms of the schools. To enable participation, we need learning environments where everyone, including students with the special education needs, are truly welcome. However, this is not enough. School practices must also be organized in ways that allow all students to learn and to act both together with others and as individuals. Only through collective processes can a sense of belonging emerge. The experience that one's presence and participation matters, both as an individual as a member of the group. Truly inclusive school provides students with both academic and social inclusion. This academic inclusion means that every student has an opportunity to learn and progress in their studies according to their individual abilities. And social inclusion, on the other hand, means that the student feels a sense of belonging of the community and is accepted as they are. Those both academic inclusion and social inclusion are equally important. Physical presence at school alone is not enough to ensure the true experience of participation. So it's important that teachers are aware of these aspects in their own teaching and develop practices that foster social participation in their classes. And through it, an inclusive school culture could develop. So these are my 3 key points in developing inclusive school culture. And thank you for listening, and let's move on.
Thank you. I would like to move on to our Irish colleague who will be with us now. It's Dr. Johanna Fitzgerald. And for you, we have 2 questions. I already said a bit in the beginning before. So what are the critical conditions for sustaining collaboration across roles and systems? And how can schools move from isolated collaboration to systemic embedded practices? So very curious to hear about this from you now. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Margarita, and thanks for the invitation to be here. When I saw that the theme was collaboration, I thought, oh, I'm so passionate about it. I think it's the only way forward if we're to, I suppose, influence any kind of systemic change for inclusive practice at the local classroom level. I was really fascinated and really enjoyed the presentations and inputs from our previous speakers. And when Kathleen was talking about communities of practice, I thought there is a woman after my own heart, and I suppose my own process and model that I use to support schools in my work is via the whole community of practice piece, because it is a transformative, sustainable approach. So that's, I suppose, in terms of anchoring my reflections here this morning, I'll be drawing on, I suppose, the community of practice approach as a systematic, sustainable mechanism to create learning spaces for teachers, for school leaders, for system leaders as well, to critically reflect on practice and policy and interpretation and enactment of policy, to have a safe space to take risks with that practice, to come back, to admit failures, because of course what we are doing, inclusive education, is such a complex endeavour, and there are no fixes or quick fix solutions to it. There's only better or worse, and the only way we arrive at the better is through that critical reflection, talking to others, sharing good practice, and trying things out, and not feeling afraid of failure or judgment if things don't always go according to plan, because of course that's the nature of humans. We never follow the plan, and even though I have a script here in front of me, I've completely gone off script already. So I was really loved what Kathleen had to say about communities of practice, and also what Jurgita had to say around the change process in Lithuania. And I was really struck by the comment around we need to trust in our teachers. And I suppose my reflections are anchored in the work I'm doing with the Education and Training Boards of Ireland at the moment, and with other management bodies as well, which is about trusting in teachers, but also in listening to teachers. So taking practice-informed research to influence the policy. So there's this iterative cycle of practice informing policy, but equally the policy and the research informing the practice. And I suppose I feel very privileged in my role at the moment with Education and Training Boards of Ireland. I'm on loan from Mary Immaculate College for a period of three years, and I suppose you'd call me a boundary spanner, where really we are, I suppose, integrating policy, practice and research in one space to support schools to change their practice, to become more inclusive. And we're called the RISE strategy, and I shared a booklet with you, so I'm not going to go into detail in terms of what we're actually doing, because I think Paolo articulated what Paolo described in terms of Portugal, with a move to, I suppose, a whole school needs-led approach, moving away from categorical specialist expert models and siloed provision around special education to a whole school approach. It really resonated with the process we are involved in with the Education and Training Boards of Ireland, and we currently have about 210 of our post-primary schools in the Education Training Boards, which is the state education system in Ireland. We're also working across management bodies with the Joint Managerial Body and another management body, the Association of Comprehensive and Community Schools in Ireland, on a smaller pilot in collaboration with the NCSE, because of course I always draw on David Mitchell's research when he talks about systemic change for inclusive education requires wholesale investment right across the system. And no one organisation or institution, whether it be the NCSE, whether it be the Department of Education, whether it be the HEIs and providers of initial teacher education or in-service teacher education, and we have quite a range of opportunities and professional learning and development for teachers in the area of inclusive and special education in Ireland. We're quite lucky there. But what I was heartened by was the recommendations from the European agency's report that issued there a couple of years ago for Ireland, in that it recognised the range, depth and breadth of professional learning and development available to teachers, but it also recognised a need to systematise that, to map it. And so what I'd love to see, and I suppose this is what we've been doing in the Education and Training Boards, is we've developed a systematic approach to support inclusive school improvement, and we use the mechanism of communities of practice to work at a national level, at a regional level, and then we have appointed system leaders or inclusion coordinators at local ETB level, who then work through our train the trainer process, capacity building process, to work at a very local level with those schools to engage in iterative cycles of school self-evaluation. Because I suppose, and where did this come from? It came from my research on the role of special education needs coordinators in Ireland, or SENCOs as some might call them. And I was interested in what Paolo said in terms of part of the move to a whole school mission was to take special ed teachers out of siloed expert roles. And I do think that that peril of expertise is a barrier to collaborative practice into active members of the school planning teams. And what Paolo articulated is exactly what we are doing and attempting to do with our schools through our ETB, Mary I Research and Knowledge Engagement strategy, to make special education, or more broadly inclusive education, center it at the heart of teaching, learning and assessment. And I suppose in terms of our manifesto, what are we hoping to achieve through systematically working with schools where we create dedicated time for collaboration? And I know when we were planning this webinar, one of the questions we I suppose reflected on was, should collaborative practice and collaboration be systematized? And I would say it is, because there's never going to be enough time. Schools are so time poor. There will never be enough time for collaboration to happen serendipitously. And what we're doing in our RISE strategy is we are building in timestamps across an 18-month period for multidisciplinary inclusion teams in schools to come together to gather data. We create all of the artifacts, resources that they need to be able to do that. They gather data from their staff, their parents and guardians, and their students to identify what's working well in the school and how they know it's working well, but also then to identify where the areas for further development are and what the implications are for professional learning and development of the entire school community. And what we've done is, what we found is it's working for us. We have built momentum. We've been working now since about 2016. And what we have found is that when we gather this data, we identify patterns and trends around the professional learning and development needs of schools at a local level. But what's fantastic about it is we are using that data to inform our engagement and collaboration with the likes of the NCSE and with IDEA, because we're able to target the bespoke, specific needs of our schools, because it's been gathered through our iterative and indefatigable data gathering processes. And we use that to strategically map and plan a suite of professional learning and development through the communities of practice, which create safe spaces for teachers, for school leaders who already have those relationships built. And going back to Jurgita's point around trust, the speed of trust allows people to expose their vulnerabilities so that they can actually access deep learning, try things out, and come back and reflect on them critically in terms of, did they work and how do we know did they work? So I think that's having a real impact for us, because ultimately our purpose within our RISE strategy is to increase the numbers of young people who have positive experiences and achieve good outcomes without requiring additional or specialist provision, while at the same time transforming our arrangements for identifying, assessing and meeting the needs of those who do. And I suppose those two goals are interconnected and interdependent in terms of how we move forward. I was also struck, and I know we're coming towards the end, but Sylvia put a very interesting comment in the chat about interprofessional or multidisciplinary work. We have a great opportunity in Ireland now, and I know this is one of the recommendations from the TSI report around mapping our teacher professional learning. We really do need to develop a national framework, interdisciplinary framework, to support all of us, from HEIs to the Education Centre Network to IDEA, the NCSE, the Department of Education, and I would say our healthcare providers of education, to come together to map and to chart out the common and shared goals around the competencies we expect not just our teachers to have, but our therapeutic and external professionals to have when they're working in schools. And at the moment, it's an exciting time in Ireland because we're developing in-school education therapy support. And I suppose one of the projects that I'm involved in, and I know Sylvia is involved in a similar project in DCU, I'm involved with allied health, speech and language therapy in the University of Limerick, 2 colleagues there, Caroline Murphy and Aoife Gallagher. And we've been working for the last 10 to 11 years now, where we bring trainee speech and language therapists together with our postgraduate teachers who are qualifying to become special ed teachers to look at case-based learning, to share that interdisciplinary space. And the purpose is twofold. One is to support the development of those skills that allow them to collaborate, because often we have an assumption that these professionals have the skills to share that space. And what our research has done, and we hopefully have a paper coming out soon on it, is that we do make an assumption that our teachers and our therapists have the skill set to share the space. And what we have found is that sometimes, because, and Sylvia pointed it out, we have heretofore had a lack of therapeutic access to students in our schools. Our teachers have not had an opportunity to work with therapists, and likewise our therapists have not had an opportunity to work with teachers, so that by the time a child might get access to a therapist in a school, it has reached crisis stage. So the teacher is nearly ready to hand it over to the expert who will fix the child. But of course, we know there is no fixing, and that if we are to arrive at a better or a worse solution or an intervention for a particular child, we need to come together to share that space. So I suppose a lot of our recommendations would be around the absolute importance of interprofessional education, so that when at initial teacher education, so pre-identity formation stage for our therapists and for our teachers, that we introduce into our HAIs modules on interprofessional education, so that in the formation of their identity, they don't form an identity just as a teacher or just as an occupational or speech and language therapist, but they form their identity as an interdisciplinarian. And we need to teach them those skills so that there isn't that power imbalance, or there isn't a sense of hierarchy sometimes, or that expertise approach, that when they get used to working together. And luckily, we've now got a situation where we can do this in Ireland, because we're introducing mandatory placements for pre-service teachers in specialist settings. We're also introducing occupational speech and language therapists, and we already have our NEPS educational psychologists working in schools. So it creates the perfect opportunity for us to embed interdisciplinary working into our schools. So I suppose communities of practice, and I'll finish now, communities of practice and interprofessional education for interprofessional collaboration will be 2 key areas where I see we can make a big impact on developing collaborative approaches in our schools.